Okay, we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Roche. I'm the CEO of ID5. And today, for a change, we're not going to talk about identity, but we're going to talk about an even bigger or more important problem around diversity and representation of ethnic minority or minorities in general, in digital advertising in particular. And for that very interesting discussion, I have the pleasure of welcoming Ozzy Ozadebe from Thomson Reuters. Ozzy, you're a programmatic specialist, and you're also the co-chair of the Black Employee Network for Thomson Reuters. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool. I noticed on your LinkedIn that you're also the artist liaison for Glastonbury, which is probably a really, really exciting topic, but let's save that for another discussion.
Yeah.
And joining us as well today is Michael Olaye from, is that the right way to pronounce your name, by the way, Michael?
You've nailed it. Well done.
You nailed it. Great stuff. And Michael, you're a video growth lead for Europe at Outbrain.
That's correct.
And you live in downtown London, not very far from a police station or an hospital.
That is exactly correct, yes. But yeah, yes, on both accounts.
Cool. Thank you both for being here. In terms of introduction, I just wanted to kind of put that discussion into context because I think context is very important on that type of topic. You guys actually pointed out a obvious lack of diversity in a set of webinars that we at ID5 organized during the lockdown period, which actually sparked a lot of interest on our side, and as a result, we wanted to start catching up with you guys and have a chat, and we realized that it would be even better if we could make this chat public and share your insights with kind of the broader community. So hence the idea for that discussion. I think our goal is to obviously talk about it, because the more we talk about it, the more kind of progress we can make as an industry. But also to try to understand the problem a bit better, and also talk about potential solutions or kind of measures that you have seen implemented or you would like to see implemented, and that could help solve this diversity gap. I think we can all recognize that there is a general lack of representation of minorities in our industry. Probably not only on panels and conferences, but in general. And maybe to kick off the discussion, one of the source of information that we can look at is the IPA census, so the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, I think it is, who's kind of tracking diversity representation within the industry, and who measured that on average there is a 13.7% share of people from ethnic minorities in the industry. But this average is actually very, very different. If you look at like junior roles, it's over 17%. If you look at managers, C-suite, CEO, C-level people, it's below 5%. So I guess my first question to you guys is do you feel that there's obviously a discrepancy, and there's like maybe a ceiling in the industry for people of colors to be able to grow and to kind of take responsibilities? Do you think there's also a problem at the entrance? Is it more difficult for people of color to get a job in advertising, for instance?
Would you like me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I did see that report. I've seen other reports that that show a similar kind of story. I think what you have, to be honest, to your point, is actually an overrepresentation, if you will, of people of color at those junior roles relative to the UK population, right? So that number of 16-17%, compares against the UK population of 13%. So if you just take that into account, then there's actually an overrepresentation. There are a lot of people of color who are clearly interested in the digital advertising industry, and they're able to actually land those jobs in the first place. As you've rightly pointed out, the issue is at the point at which we get to those senior roles. It starts to diminish as we go through senior management, and as you pointed out, in the sort of C-suite roles, we're talking about 4 to 5%, and that is a significantly low number. And that would say that's a clear underrepresentation of people of color relative to the rest of the UK population. So it's important
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's not a training problem. It's not an education problem. It's not a recruitment problem originally, because there are representation of kind of diverse minorities in the industry. It's advancements.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's fair to say from what I can see.
Yeah. Ozzy, you agree with that?
Yes and no. I guess from my side, the way I see it is maybe perhaps there is an overrepresentation, but I'm just thinking about my journey into media, really, and I don't necessarily think it was as easy. I think there are, and we probably need to splice that data a little bit more, because when you're doing things like media sales, it's this classed as media, right? If you're working in classified sales, it's classed as media and digital advertising. And there's something to be said that there's a lot of people who go into, if you're going in via sales route, like a lot of people there. However, I don't necessarily think that when you start looking at the strategy, planning roles, the comms roles within agencies, that there's lots and lots of representation there, in my opinion, from what I can tell. But then what I would say is, without taking it to the senior level, I don't really want to go that far. What I do think there's a problem is like when there's a lot of people coming into, I would say, the industry, is I feel like because of there is that lack of representation at the senior level, I feel people feel disillusioned. You enter into the industry with an appetite for wanting to do this thing that you love and you read and you see everywhere, whether you're in content, or you're creative, or you're in insights, you're like, oh, I'm in media, I'm an advertiser, let's get on with it. However, that I've always found, and in my experiences, people after a year, sometimes 2 years, feel a bit disillusioned and don't feel as included or as part of the conversation. And I think more reading needs to be done really at that very early stage, in terms of making people feel like, right, you are in the right business for you, and we support, and we are a diverse company. I think a few years ago, I went to an Adweek event where they were speaking about diversity in the industry, and there was an Indian lady who was saying that she was the only one, in the agency, when she started about 5 years ago, and she then went on to say that, after about a year and a half, I felt like this wasn't the place for me, so I really wanted to leave, and there was no one that could really relate to me, and I always was kind of made to stand out. So I think there's a piece before we even go, okay, why isn't there anyone really at those levels? I think there needs to be work done in terms of that entry level. What do we do to keep those people in those roles, and how can we encourage and entice them to stay a little bit longer and build that professional capital and career, because that's what makes people then feel like they want to stay. But I believe you may get a lot coming, but that period of a year and a half, 2 years is so important in terms of the growth of someone within the business, before they then realize, oh, actually, I'm not in the right place and I want to leave. So that's my take on it, I would say.
I mean, if I may just briefly, I mean, yeah, just to touch on a point I think that Ozzy made really well there in terms of aspirations and being able to see those people at the top. I think, and I really don't mean this to be inflammatory. There's a lot of conversation about, an old boys club, in terms of this industry, and I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to that. But I would take it almost a step further, and to say that there's almost a white club, and it's not a question of race. It's just a question of, the reason I say that is because I think there's been a lot to be done in order to try to be inclusive with especially women within this industry. And there's still obviously a long way to go within that. But that, you know, you will not go on a panel these days and not see, many women in general. And, you know, I think that that's obviously fantastic. But I think that in terms of those opportunities, that has not necessarily extended to people of color just yet. I think that conversation is only just now really starting to begin. And then, you know, the hope is that that's going to be able to have some momentum and people will be able to see that, because there are lots of talented people at the top of their game in this industry. But as it is right now, they're not put in those positions where they're able to be visible. And I think that that's a problem.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, and we'll come back to that about, like, you know, what we can do to kind of foster diversity like this. I think maybe one of the comment that I would like to make, also back on your point about like different roles, right? Underrepresentation in like strategic planning or creative. One of the speakers that unfortunately couldn't join us today was had recently joined a creative agency, and her feedback was there's a lot less people of color in creative roles as well, and that has also a knock-on effect on the representation that they embed into their work, right? In the choice of people in the ads, for instance, or how you can represent diversity in the communication that you work on, which has a massive, I mean, it's pop culture, right? It has a massive impact into what people think and how they think about things, and so that might also be one of the area where more focus on diversity could help, not only within the industry, but also with the message that the industry are building for the outside world.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really a diversity of thought, really, isn't it? Like, you know, different experiences, different backgrounds will always bring different, you know, takes, you know, to the table, and opportunities, you know, and brainstorming, when you have those brainstorming sessions. You know, when you don't have that, you know, you've got the same people doing what they've always done, and that's not to be I don't mean that in a bad way. However, when you look at, you know, advertising, you look at some areas where we're like overrepresented, you know, maybe sports, for example, you know, and is an area you could say that, but I don't want that to reduce our role in terms of, like, you know, making us part like a minutia, like, you know, that's kind of like all we can kind of do, and we do that very well. Yeah. When really there are other positions, you know, and when you look back, you know, before the Mad Men days, you know, I always try and refer to that, and then even look at advertising before that, and you look at, you know, how the portrayal of, like, you know, black people on TV, it was never really in a positive light, and it was always in a way that would make you almost feel, you know, some sort of self-hate about yourself in terms of what you see on TV. And whilst there's been a lot of positive steps towards that, you know, like these days, you know, I think IKEA have done some really good things, and I can't remember, the Old Spice advert has done some more positive, like, images around, like, you know, being black and having like a black family. I think like those have been really good. I definitely think, like, you know, if you don't have those, you know, those like positive, those like diverse panels, you know, diverse teams, that ultimately end products, you know, may never be the same. Yep. You know? And I think from a creative perspective, you are 100% right. You know, in terms of what you said in terms of that pipeline.
Let's try to kind of dig a bit deeper into the understanding of the problem. Do you feel, I mean, you're both in a very international organization. You've probably had experience in kind of more local, bigger, smaller organization. Is there a type of organization that is kind of better at diversity and inclusion than others? Is it more of are small companies better than big companies? Are American companies better than European companies? What's your take on this? Do you have any point of view on that?
I think there's quite a lot to unpack if you try to compare companies, if you try to compare countries. There are rules and legislations and things like that are put in place in the US. There's affirmative action in South Africa. There's the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act that also exists, and it's all about trying to give people of color more opportunities in order to be able to succeed. I think that's in itself is too much to be sort of discussed today. Whether you think that that's correct or not,
Yep.
that's for other people to be able to determine. But the truth is that we do not have, even as it is right now, fair representation for women in positions of power. And I think that that conversation is significantly further along than this conversation of having people in ethnic minorities. And I'm saying that just to put some scale on the actual conversation, to show us how far we still need to go in order to be able to do that. But I do believe that the larger a company is, the more it does have a responsibility in order to be able to look at things and have and implement things like diversity programs, and see if it is actually offering fair chances to people of all ethnicities. I think it's a more difficult thing to do if you're a company of just 5 people and you're trying to start out. There are different challenges that you've got to put in place. But when you get to a certain size, I think you do have to look at yourself and say, does our company represent the nation, the world? Is it fair? And are we giving equal opportunities for all? Not just to be able to be brought into the company, but to be able to progress to the positions right at the very top as well.
Okay. Ozzy, you're in that position, right? You're in a big company who's put together this kind of Black employee network. What's your, and you also have experience in smaller organizations in the past, right? Within industry as well. How is that? How do you analyze this?
It's such a broad question. I guess I guess from my perspective, I've never actually, I didn't, in my first year, I'd say, of being at Thomson Reuters, appreciate that, that was a thing. So, within TR, we have what we call our business resource groups. And the business resource groups are essentially like entities that are created to support the organization across a multitude of different, verticals and channels, and issues that, they want to raise awareness around. So we have Asian Affinity Network, we have our Black Employee Network, our Green Team, volunteer teams, Women's Network, Women in Leadership, like LGBTQ networks. And I think all of them have been very eye-opening for me. Essentially, in my first year, I wasn't aware that this was a thing. Even like we have an early careers network, and I definitely think like when you're in a big organization, there are those infrastructure in place. And to Mike's point about having like a collective responsibility as a business to ensure that you are catering for the different types of people that are coming into the company. I definitely feel like when I was at a smaller firm, whilst it wasn't, we didn't have that. Whilst we didn't have that, it probably didn't stand out quite as much, if that made sense. The only time I felt it would be when I then started going out into the industry and to like industry events. When I went on like meetings and I had to present to like 20, 30 people, and I would look around the room and it would always just be like pretty much me really as the only black man there, or the only black person there, I should say. That was when I started to realize, and actually, whilst working for a smaller company, I didn't really notice it as much. I certainly felt it when I was out in the market. But then now working for a big firm, there is a disparity in our business, and that's something that, we are taking responsibility for, and that's something that we are actually working toward, because, we want to make things better. I certainly noticed, where there are gaps that we need to plug as a company, and I took the responsibility myself, working with other people within the Black Employee Network in terms of what role do I want to play here, and how visible do I want to be, not only to the business, but also like outwardly as well, and I think, we can obviously talk about like what we're doing a bit later on, but I think, when you are a big company, certainly, I definitely feel that there's a collective responsibility for you to make sure you're doing your most to represent everybody. We're a global business. We can't be seen to not think globally about people and about representations. We're in over 100 countries globally, and I think that helps us shape the vision of our future, and also very open-minded in that sense. And I think that's one of the good things about working for a big company, both here and when I was also at eBay as well, very open-minded in terms of culture. I wanted to introduce new things.
Yeah, so I mean, there's an obvious, right, ethical argument in favor of bringing more diversity within, whether it is gender diversity, ethnic diversity, whatever. But I'm curious if you know of any business arguments. Has there been any study like proving or illustrating instinctively, right? I am in favor of having like different points of views and different experience, because I think that's what creates this bubbling and energy, and that what brings kind of other ways of thinking, rather than if you're just like a bunch of guys who've who've been through the same schools and who have the same experience, then you come up with the same solution. It's not a very creative way of looking at things. But this is instinctive. I don't know if you guys know of any kind of research,
I do
anything
actually.
putting this argument from purely from a business standpoint.
Yeah, so I think the British Institute Marketing Association, BIMA, I think that's what they stand for. Might be wrong on that. So they've done a study, and what they've seen is that it's genuinely beneficial for a company, as on average, companies with more sort of superior record of ethnic and racial diversity have earned on average 35% more than other companies that are not able to sort of stand up to the same kind of ethno and racial diversity. I think those numbers speak volumes, and I think that that in itself is a business case, a business reason why it's better to be able to have lots of different types of people working at any one company.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have I read some of the research, and it was broken down in terms of like productivity, innovation, like profits as well, because ultimately it's about the bottom line really. Yeah. And the numbers were significantly up in the double digits, so roughly 33%. You would see in terms of like being innovative, and challenging the status quo, because one of the things you don't do sometimes is sometimes you do what everybody else does because it's kind of the safe thing to do. And when you have a diverse team, you can be innovative and take chances and take risks that you wouldn't normally take. Productivity levels goes up as well, because it creates a certain different type of competition within the team as well, in terms of when you really wanted to prove that you are good at your job and you're able to carry the mantle or shoulder the mantle, however you want to call it, and then ultimately that leads down to ultimately to that revenue, for the business. So there have been studies done. I don't have exact company names. I do have one, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say it out loud. So I'm not going to. But definitely, I think there's some studies really around that.
I think it's a very interesting argument, and probably one that isn't kind of shared enough, because it's always like you always fall on the easy kind of, okay, I couldn't search for that kind of different person to put on the panel because I didn't have the time or whatever. But like, if there are actually like numbers or like research that prove that it's more efficient, that it's more creative, that it's better for the business to kind of foster diversity and inclusion, I think it's probably a more kind of a more rational way of looking at things, right?
Yeah. I think ultimately you want people to be in their roles for merit reasons, right? We don't want another tick box exercise. Like, nobody wants that. So I think that's really one of the best ways in which you can prove that a concept works. There probably isn't as many case studies out there because there aren't as many businesses, even though that do say, oh, we are very diverse. There are probably very few that actually do the actual like analysis and data behind, how diverse are we as a business, and and what does that look like in terms of our productivity and what we the business that we win or business that we lose at the end of the year. Yeah, there's not a lot of that's been done. Maybe because, again, back to the point, we've not had enough people in those positions to really look at those things. But I think we're in a unique position now because I think companies are starting to look at those types of information, type of data, and they're starting to understand that actually it is very beneficial for us to be and to look at, you know, where we stand right now today as a business, where we've been in the past 5 years, and where we intend to be in the next 5 years. And I think hopefully, you know, this moment now can give us that pivot where we can start using that to really build those solid case studies that you've mentioned, you know, to say this is the business case for why we need to have more diverse individuals in our team. And but I don't know, Michael,
well, I mean, you know, look, people have tried to do it before. You know, Pinterest have put figures out there to say, you know, we need to get X amount of women in positions of power, X amount of women into more engineering positions, X amount of people of color into the company. They set out benchmarks, and you know, they were very proud in the industry putting that out there in order to call out other companies for not being able to do it. And they've not been able to hit those numbers, and they publicly had to kind of renege on that and come back on that. So I understand that there must be difficulties if people are actively trying to promote that, but it doesn't mean that we stop. It doesn't mean that we don't try to progress.
I think it's a good thing that they put the numbers out, because actually it adds a pressure on them to deliver
100%.
Deliver against them. And if you're willing to hold yourself accountable in a public forum, then actually what that means, and that shows someone like myself who may want to work for a company, I would be considering a company like that, because I know that, you know, they have the best intentions and that's what they want to do. And if they're looking to hire people that will help them to A, B, C, D, whatever, you know, their goals and objectives are. Whereas, you know, if you're not saying anything, then it's actually really bad. You should not say anything. You know,
we're talking about transparency now again. We don't talk about that enough.
Topic for another discussion. Okay, so let's talk about solutions now, right? And I mean, I am a middle-aged white male CEO of a company. I am exhibit A of the problem, right? Like I am the robot kind of, that's me. So what advice do you have for me to make ID5, but on a broader scale, to foster diversity and inclusion? We talked about role models, right? That's one of the things that you said. We need more role models for people who join the industry to look up to, so that they can see, that there is a path for them to success and there's a path for them to growth. Is this something that you would recommend? Is this the solution to the problem, or?
I think there are a lot of things. I think having diversity inclusion programs, something like what Ozzy is obviously working on, these kind of things are very important. Education has to happen all year round. It's not just during during Black History Month or during Pride or Mental Health Awareness Week and stuff like this. It's an all year round thing. I think that as a man in charge, you need to get data for your company and understand if it's in line with not just the rest of the industry, but the population at large. Are you able to look at yourself and say that you're happy with the way that your company is currently being represented? I think training is important in order to be able to deal with issues relating to not feeling included, because there are a lot of people. The fact of the matter is 40% of Afro-Caribbeans within this industry have felt that they've been discriminated against at some point in a way that has hurt their career aspirations. And that number compares with, I think, 12% of people who have been physically impaired, 22% of people who've suffered from mental health issues, 34% of people who've aged between 55 to 64 years old who've suffered as a result of age discrimination, and 35% of all women. So there is a huge number of different people who have felt that they've been discriminated at some point. So there needs to be more training in order for these people to be able to not just talk to their managers who are on the front line, so that they can discuss all things from manner of anxiety, depression, as well as discrimination, but that they can talk about it in an open and honest way, and most importantly, without fear of reprisal. And as I mentioned, the other thing is that it's important to understand that it's beneficial for the company if it actually makes sense in terms of numbers. If you're going to be earning potentially 35% more on average, then those are numbers that you can't really argue with. It's a bottom-up effort in terms of this. It's not going to necessarily. The data shows that bottom up is not the way that it's going to change. It's going to be from the top down.
Yeah.
It's going to take somebody who is typically, unfortunately, a white male to look at himself and his position and say that I've got something that is a certain privilege that data suggests other people are not going to be able to have that position to be able to progress themselves. So I've got to look at it myself, and I've got to try and inflict that change, because if it doesn't happen from that position, from that top down, then unfortunately, I don't see a lot of opportunity for change in the future.
Do you agree with that, Ozzy? Do you think it's got to be a top down? It's got to be like a realization from management that this is an issue and that this needs to be looked after?
Yeah, I think I just want to, just before I even go into that, I just want to Michael and I are not the spokesperson for all Black people in the industry.
Well, hold on, not joking.
I think it's very, very important to stress that point. I can't speak for every Black person in my company, and I can't speak for every Black person in the industry and or people of color in the industry. I think it's very important to stress that point. And one of the dangers of being one of the few Black people in the business is people always come to you for answers or feedback, and whilst we're more than happy to provide feedback and try and provide solutions and be included in conversations, ultimately that decision rests with senior management in terms of how they want their company to be portrayed and how they want people to feel about working within the business. So I definitely agree that there's a lot of things that you can do, and there are a lot of steps that can be taken to help support either your Black colleagues or people of color, in their respective organizations. There needs to be more commitment in terms of one, hiring more people of color, more Black employees, certainly from my perspective, in a way that's, again, sustained, that's measurable and meaningful, to the company, to what we alluded to in terms of that bottom line. I think that's really, really important. But then I think outside of that, how do you hire and, employees in a sustained way? Perhaps they need to look at their recruitment strategy in terms of, what recruitment agencies they're working with, both from an entry level to a senior and ELT level. What does that look like? Do they need to have specialist recruitment agencies that specialize in just executive, Black talent or diverse talent? Do you need to look at that? Do you need to look at specialist agencies again and on the lower part for the more junior or middle management roles? Because they are out there. Because once you start devoting those resources into hiring people, that focus specifically on candidates that you feel that are missing out, then actually what you can start doing is increasing that pipeline of people that are coming into the business, right? But I also think that there need to be goals set in place for senior managers and people managers who fail to meet those goals, and there need to be consequences for them. If a senior manager or head of a company is still going to be getting their bonuses, in my opinion, at the end of the year, if they deliver, the X amount where they're going to deliver out on, then to them, I guess it doesn't really matter who delivers that revenue. But maybe there needs to be a D&I goal, tied into those bonuses in terms of, if you're not able to meet these types of targets in terms of D&I across teams, across people managers, then actually, your goal, your bonus could be harmed. I think things like that need to be looked at, because that's really how you start affecting change. In terms of the hiring process, in most companies, you normally would have from my experience, just the manager, like the hiring manager who might hire, maybe like a senior person also in that team that hire. But I think D&I and HR probably need to work a bit more closely with hiring managers in terms of looking at the makeup of those teams. What do those teams look like? And what they're comprised of, and to help them ensure that they are creating excuse me, an environment that allows people, more diverse individuals into the team. Because I think once you start having more of those types of like as was different departments lean in, it can help deconstruct some of that, on some of that bias, whether they know it's there or not, right? Because if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know you've got like some conscious or unconscious bias around specific issues, then actually leaning on other people and other teams to help deconstruct some of that would really help. But then I also think there needs to be things around bias training for all employees in businesses, so that they're aware of where they sit within like society, what that means for them, the liberty that they have versus some people don't have. I mean, I know hearing from a very young age that you have to work twice as hard as someone else for a job that you definitely know that you will deserve at some point is actually quite demotivating, to hear at a young age. Oh, you have to work twice as hard. Why do I need to work twice as hard? Like, that's the first question. But that's unfortunately the reality of what goes on, and conversations that a lot of our Black families have to have with their kids, mums and dads have to have with their kids. I said the same to my little sister. You've got she's in university, and I've told her you need to do X, Y, Z, because that's the only way to ensure that you are not dropping the ball at any point in time. But then I think, I could go on about a few other things, but I think there are other things in terms of like development programs specifically targeted at people of color and Black employees within organizations that needs to happen. The fact that we are underrepresented is clear to see, but how do we make sure that people within those organizations stay in the organization, and or grow within that organization, if not in the industry? So there needs to be like probably industry-wide development programs aimed at these people to ensure that you're building them up, building the caliber up. And to yourself, you mentioned yourself, ID5, what can you guys do? I think when you're putting together your panels and you're putting together, conversations, then I think you need to work a bit harder so that you can spot that, okay, we have 3 or 4 or 5 people that we want to bring to this discussion. How do we ensure that we're getting as many different people as possible on this topic, be it about, head of bidding, about,
Yep.
Third-party cookies, whatever it may be. But those are just some ideas that I have. But obviously, there's a lot more that can be brought to the table.
Yeah, which and this is like we're bordering to what you were talking about earlier, Michael, which is affirmative action, right? It's like setting targets. I don't know if quota is a politically correct way to put it, but like it's trying to kind of force representation that wouldn't be naturally here, but just so that we can have always on, right, in our recruitment process, in our promotion process, in our marketing effort, in our visible kind of webinars and conferences, right?
But I mean, these kind of things exist in industries, outside of advertising, and in other countries in other ways. When we talk about Scandinavia, we see them as leading the way in a lot of different things. But in those countries, they've put in benchmarks that say you have to have and I don't want to say the wrong number, so I'll say a certain amount of women on any particular board of directors. And we see them as as trailblazers, people who are ahead of us. And I think in order for us to be able to look at that and say, okay, but is that something that we want to do here? I think this conversation currently seems to be a little bit more difficult. But things like the Black Lives Matter movement has allowed people of color to have a little bit more of a voice in recent times, and on top of that momentum, in order to be able to carry these conversations, and to be able to challenge the status quo and say, hey guys, to be honest, when you posted on LinkedIn, Matteo, I had heart palpitations before I responded to you, because I thought I might be committing career suicide. But at the same time, again, I've got to give you credit for allowing us to have a conversation off the back of that, and then for this conversation to be happening in a public forum. But it's going to take a lot more of a collective effort from us all in order to get where we need to be going. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've got to be the change you want to see in the world, right? It's it's not from me.
I mean, there is one particular school that I do want to kind of shout out specifically, and it kind of relates a little bit to what Ozzy was talking about before. I used to work with them when I was working at Rubicon Project, Magnite now. It's called the Brixton Finishing School, which is a school that basically gives almost like inner city kids in London an opportunity to be able to attend a course in digital advertising and spend the day with companies such as obviously Rubicon, Google, Group M, and quite a few others. And off the back of that, actually land a role. And obviously all of these courses are for people who've not been able to attend a university. There are people who have not been able to attend for socio-demographic reasons. And obviously the great majority of the people in those courses are of some different type of ethnicity. So I was really proud to have been able to kind of take part of that kind of initiative. It was incredibly fruitful, obviously, for the people who were able to do it and then potentially secure a job on the other end. But then obviously for people like myself who took part of the program in order to help teach, learn myself, and expand my bandwidth. And I think these kind of things are and should be more important for companies moving forwards.
It's the, can you say the name again? The Brixton Finishing School?
Brixton Finishing School, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can speak to Steve Wing at Magnite. He's a really big pusher of them, and he was the reason why we were able to work with them in the first place.
Good. The message has been shared with whoever's watching this.
No worries.
Okay, cool. We're almost at the end of our discussion. I think one last comment, like, one commitment from my side. You guys were talking about earlier. Was it Pinterest kind of publicly said, set out goals and kind of put themselves on the line, and I think this is something that consistently we've said as a result of that initial discussion, right? We're gonna have a more diverse representation when we organize events in the future at ID5. It's a small contribution to the improvement of the world, but again, it's as much as we can do so far. So we're committing to this, and I'm taking a very public stance here, saying that we will beat the whatever that is, 15, 20, 25% representation target in our own efforts. What would be the one or two things you would recommend managers, let's say white managers, to do to help their teams or help their employees become more have more chances to succeed in the industry? What would be your advice?
I'd say be willing to understand. This isn't a what about me moment. This is people saying, look at the data. There is a very clear underrepresentation of people of color at positions of power that doesn't necessarily exist in junior positions. So there's obviously some kind of disconnect there. So if that's the case and it doesn't seem to add up, then what can I do to try and make that change? How much am I willing to learn and understand the problem, and not just accept it as a status of, oh well, maybe that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And I think if people are willing to look at that,
learn and understand,
absolutely,
so that you can influence and you can help things change.
Exactly. I think that's the first and most important step.
Ozzy?
I think it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is that the right word to use? And being okay to talk about race. You'd be surprised how many like if you have a white manager who's probably never hired a black person before and or speaks to them about racial issues and or topics, they may feel very uncomfortable about broaching that subject with someone in their team about a subject like this, right? But then also there are a lot of like I'll speak from black people who basically also not very comfortable talking about race to their white managers. It's not just the one. It's actually the other way. And a lot of that comes from a lot of systemic issues with like society as a whole. When you have to deal with like I don't know, like comments and like microaggressions on a day-to-day basis, which can wear you down, like believe it or not, when you have to hear people say things to you or talk about specific way in which you carry yourself or whatever it may be, which happens all the time, and some people think it's just like, oh, it's a joke, but actually it's not. It's really not that funny. I have a friend who works at an agency. He gave me a really good example of him and his girlfriend, and getting into a really big argument about it because they're a mixed heritage relationship, and and she said something to him and was like another elephant in the room moment, and just from a relationship perspective, and he absolutely wasn't very happy with her and just said to her, I don't even think you realize that some of those comments that you make, even though you just think they're funny and you say it and everybody else will laugh at him, but I don't actually find that very funny at all. So I think there are learnings in terms of like managers just have to be like comfortable talking about race, but it's never going to be a comfortable topic, right? It's going to take a lot of time. There's a lot of things to unpack, when you're hiring someone of color. And I'm not just speaking just specifically about black people. I have friends from Indian descent, in the industry, friends from Chinese, Asian descent, Chinese descent in the industry, and I make an effort from my perspective to learn and understand as much as I can about loads of different issues. I know certainly one of my friends was getting a lot of really, really nasty jokes around like the Chinese and Chinese cultures. And then I shared a post, and she got in touch with me randomly and said, that's just really made my day, Ozzy. And like, thank you very much for doing that. And I said, people making comments because of like coronavirus and like, it's really not that funny. It's not funny. People will find that offensive. So I think there's a listening part, but there's also like an educational piece, right? Really tuning up and understanding, what are the different systemic issues and systemic silence that's affecting, progression within the industry, and how can we, take that part, because once you start doing that and educating yourself, then actually, we'll be in a much better place in order for us to be able to, start like moving forward. But at the moment, I don't even think we're at the stage where there's solutions. I think now we're at a stage of like, let's uncover the problems. Like, what are the problems?
Yeah.
If I were to come up, I mean, I was obviously sharing some ideas earlier on, but I don't even think we're really at that stage just yet. We are at these are the problems that we have within our industry. Okay, right. How did we get here? And what can we do to try and fix that? I know that, when I go to meetings and, or when I go out industry events, I make really, really strong effort to keep in touch with any black people I meet or people of color, because there's not really a lot of us in the industry. So you get to know people very, very quickly, but I think it's important for us to also do what we can, Michael came to me and said, Ozzy, what do you think about doing this? And, I was like, yeah, let's go ahead and let's do it, because ultimately we want to be able to, we need to work together, Michael and I, to make sure we're driving and sharing as much positive message around, what we think the industry can do better around, issues around race, around diversity, around more representation, both at our level and, and beyond, and stuff. So yeah. And it's not just an advertising thing. It's just advertising because of we're in this industry.
Yeah. We can only try to influence so much, right? Right. So the 2 points I'll take away from this is learn and educate yourself about the problem and the sources of the problem. And the second topic is have a discussion with your teams, and don't make this a taboo topic, but on the contrary, put it on the table. Make sure this is not something that people are afraid to speak up about. And let's have a transparent and open discussion about the topic of diversity within our teams.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much for your time, guys. This was a really, really interesting discussion. I really appreciate your participation and your insights and the exchange. You look like you have something to say.
No, I was just going to say thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have this forum. I think it is an important forum, and I think you were brave to take it on, to be perfectly honest, because it is quite divisive. It is quite controversial. Some people will, yes, nod along and believe in some of what we've talked about here today, but I guarantee there'll be some people who won't, who will believe that it is not really actually, in fact, a problem. So I just appreciate that you're willing to have the conversation.
Well, thank you for helping us have the conversation in any case.
I'd like to just second that very much. I think it would have been really, it's a shame that we've a couple of people down, but yeah, it would have been good to get an agency perspective as well, just really around some of these topics. But, hopefully that's something we can pick up again in the future. But yeah, I just want to say thank you as well, because, I don't think it's really an issue really broached in that industry a lot, and if spoken of. So I think hopefully this creates a platform in which, people feel like they can speak, like to Michael's point earlier on around, having heart palpitations, I've kind of been through that quite like a lot, especially recently. I did a blog post a few weeks ago, and that got me a lot of conversations with a lot of people internally, but also externally as well, with people reaching out to me. But I realized that actually, we need to start standing up and actually making sure these things are on the agenda. Like a closed mouth don't get fed, right? And if we're not brave enough to have a conversation, then no one's gonna do that for us. So it's up to us to make sure that we're doing our bit in terms of going, this is on the table, this is what we want to do. And I'm open, as part of the Black Employee Network, we are having meetings and conversations and partnering with businesses who want to work with us. I'm working with the Black Employee Network guys at Adobe. I've been reached out with a few other networks who want to work with us and see how we can ensure that this is top of the agenda, and we're connecting people. And we because we do need allies. That's like so important. Positive allyship is so important. We're not going to do this on our own, like as Mark said earlier on. So yeah, so that's that.
Well, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. I think that will be the conclusion of the topic. Thank you very much, guys. Again, it was a real pleasure to have that discussion with you, and looking forward to progressing that together in the industry in the future. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be in touch later. Bye.